It's a very encouraging moment when you get a standing ovation before you begin your speech. Really, really. Thank you, Chancellor Superud and esteemed colleagues. But most of all, I'd like to thank all of you, the graduating students 2018, who invited me here in this very, very dynamic year to be your commencement speaker. I'm very grateful and honored to you. I love how that video ended on awakenings. I hope you saw that moment, because that's us today. We've said this before, this is not an ending. This is a beginning. It's an awakening. That's what commencement is. And so for the next few minutes, I'd like to tell you some stories about awakenings, of how sometimes the flash moments in your life, the least likely people, of coincidence that will happen in your life can change the course of it, and how, if you can recognize those, you can be ready for them and act on them, not only to change your own life, but perhaps more importantly, to change your community or even the world. It's not the moment itself that matters so much. It's what you do with it. When I ran that Boston Marathon 51 years ago, I was a junior at the Newhouse School. It was an era, yes. It was an era not unlike the one we are going through now. It was an era then also of protest, of racial division, of sexual contentiousness, of questioning social injustice, all thrown in with its own 60s brand of terrorism, which was a nuclear holocaust. I was not unaware of these things, but I was just another naive student who wanted to stay out of trouble, go running, and get through my studies. I somehow thought all of these things were not my business and would somehow magically resolve themselves. There was no women's intercollegiate sports at Syracuse in those days. This is pre-Title IX. So I trained unofficially with the men's cross-country team and found them amazingly welcoming and supportive in those very early years of the feminist movement. Particularly helpful was their volunteer manager, a rather ancient guy. You saw him on the video. He was really old. He was 50. And his name was Arnie Briggs. Arnie was the least likely source of inspiration to a 19-year-old girl. He was not a university man. He was a blue-collar postal worker who delivered the mail up and down Comstock Avenue as fast as he could, so he could go out and train in the afternoon with the Syracuse boys and practice for his beloved Boston Marathon, which he ran annually. But by the time I met him, he was old and hobbled no more Boston Marathons, and he was relegated to running with the girl, who was quite slow. That was me. But you know what? Arnie didn't care. Arnie only wanted to share his infectious love of running with everybody. And when we ran for miles and miles together, and I told him I wanted to run the Boston Marathon, he didn't believe any woman anywhere could do it. The longest event then in the Olympic Games for women was 800 meters, 2 laps around the track, and more than 25.5 miles short of a marathon. If a woman ran anything longer, she was flirting with danger. As a challenge, Arnie and I ran 31 miles together in practice, 5 more than the 26-mile marathon distance, and Arnie fainted at the end of the workout. On awakening, he said, "Women have hidden potential in endurance and stamina." Well, we discovered a whole new universe, and it's playing out today. And it was Arnie who insisted that I officially register for the Boston Marathon, saying how proud he was of me. I thought all men were as wonderful as Arnie Briggs in this team. I didn't have any idea how lucky I was. I had a lot of good teachers at Syracuse University, but I know now that Arnie Briggs, the mailman, was the most influential professor of all, and I am dedicating this speech today in his memory. Never sell anyone short. Pay attention and pay respect. Sometimes the simple wisdom of a kind heart impacts you the most. It wasn't until the Boston Marathon race official attacked me mid-stride in that race simply because I was a woman and tried to rip off my running bib, number 261, that I was jolted into reality. I was scared witless and deeply humiliated, but I knew I had to finish that marathon or no one would believe that women had the capability and deserved inclusion. Making that tough decision changed everything, both public perception and my own way of thinking. I could have walked off the course in fear and anger, and then for a split second, I wanted to. I was so ashamed, but instead I plodded on. And finally, at about 22 miles in the race, after mentally murdering that race official every way a person could be murdered, I realized he was just a product of his time. It wasn't even his fault. Now, the truth is you can't run 26 miles and stay mad very long. That's the truth. But it's the anger there changed from defensiveness into productive. And in a real awakening moment, I realized that other women were not in the race or didn't take adventurous things because they were afraid of the old myths of limitation. I also realized something else. I realized I wasn't special, that talent is everywhere. And please, if you're asleep now, wake up and listen to this one line. Talent is everywhere. It only needs an opportunity. In this case, women had no opportunities to disprove those old myths and restrictions. And then I knew I had the goal of my life, which was to create those opportunities for them. It wasn't just about running per se. It was about changing women's lives. But finishing was paramount, and finish I did, crossing the line a much wiser person. In life, you will find that destiny, more often than not, is simply finishing the job. The journalists at the finish line were irritated that I finished. In their eyes, I was violating some kind of male domain. The officials disqualified me and expelled me from the Athletic Federation for, among other things, running with men, which was wonderfully ironic because who else? There was nobody else, right? And besides, all the men in the race were supportive and motivating to me. So you see, running here is just a metaphor for our lives. We strive and accomplish something difficult together. We respect and we support each other. It was only the officials, the media, and some spectators, people who didn't get it, several of whom, sadly, at the time, were women, who were really mean to me. In the end, as ugly as that moment was at the time, it both radicalized and inspired me. I was lucky. I showed up, and I was given that opportunity. Often it's the adversity in your life that gives you the greatest ideas. Sometimes the worst things in your life become the best things. But for sure, each of us encounter social injustice every day, in small ways, like seeing a kid get put down rather than positively reinforced, or maybe in big ways, like blatant racial discrimination. And every time you walk away from it, pretend it's not your job, you take another drop of bitterness in your life. You cannot solve all of the injustices, of course, but you can undertake to solve some of them. There are plenty of ways to pick up a negative, turn it around, and from it create a positive force for good. It can even enhance your career, or it can even become a career in itself. But trust me, all of that was not on my mind a year later. A day in May, 50 years ago, as I sat, sort of, where you are sitting now. It was Archibald Stadium in those days, nothing like this, believe me. But anyway, 50 years ago, I was sitting where you are sitting now, and where I can assure you the furthest thing from my imagination was that someday I would be on this stage speaking to you. I was just like many of you are right now, sleep deprived from just squeaking by in all of my courses, preoccupied with cleaning my room, hitting the road and starting a new job in just 3 days. Plus, wait for it, my prospective in-laws were in the audience meeting my parents for the first time. And I was absolutely exhausted trying to be the perfect bride-to-be and not this upstart athlete they'd read about in the New York Times. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, all I could think of was, I can't be getting a university degree. I don't know anything. I was right about the Boston Marathon, but I could not have been more wrong about my degree. I knew a lot. Maybe most of all, I knew I could show up and work hard, or I wouldn't be walking across this stage, because school wasn't easy for me. And maybe it wasn't easy for a lot of you either. And I knew something else. Syracuse University taught me about excellence. There was a standard of work and behavior that was expected. And obtaining that degree from Syracuse University was a mark of excellence. It put me head and shoulders above others in a competitive marketplace. And this was especially significant for a young woman who was then in what was still a man's world. And I was exceedingly grateful to parents who sacrificed a lot to pay for an education I desperately wanted. All of these years later, I am, and I hope you are too, overwhelmed with gratitude, because most people in the world, regardless of how hard they work or how deserving they may be, may never have the opportunity you have right now. Please don't waste it. Be thankful, and when you can, realize one of the obligations of excellence is to pass on what you know to the talent that is out there but has not had this chance. There's a funny thing about knowledge in running. The more you learn, the more you don't know. And the faster you run only shows you how much more training you need if you're serious. It's quite shocking, and sometimes it's very, very daunting. But one thing for sure, it's fascinating. You are probably the worst judges of your own capability. And the only way you push beyond your self-imposed limits is to take the next step. You'll surprise yourself. As I improved as a runner, my career also improved. Not only in my regular PR job during the day, but in the creative ideas of how to construct a whole legitimate sport of long-distance running for women. Every night after work and after a run, and before heading out to night class, yes, I went to school at night to get my master's degree, I would write down all of these ideas for making it happen. As the 1972 Olympic Games approached, I knew I had to be there in person to see how the politics work to move women's running forward. Sometimes just showing up is not quite enough. Sometimes you need to be bold to get information. But boldness usually comes with a reality check. With my new Syracuse master's degree under my arm, I confidently marched into the newsroom of the New York Daily News. You can't do this nowadays. You can't just walk in, all right? But I did. I reminded them that they did not have a reporter on the spot in Munich. And if they would give me press credentials and pay for what they printed of my work, I'd take care of everything else and cover track and field for them. I had zero money. I took out a 3-year loan, paying the first year's installments with the last year's loan money. And I'm sure every parent in the audience is now groaning in agony hearing this risky story. But it paid off. It paid off in both enlightenment and in horror. I was only 24, and now I was working alongside some of the greatest sports reporters in the most advanced sports communication network I'd ever seen. That is, until one morning, we were blindsided by the news that the Palestinian terrorists were holding Israeli athletes hostage in the Olympic Village. Later, 12 Israeli team members were murdered. I was shattered and seriously out of my depth as a young journalist working alongside the hardened war reporters who suddenly surfaced. But I wasn't out of my depth as a runner. The Olympics are sacred to athletes, and yet we mattered least in this dreadful moment. I took several months of vagabonding and running all over Europe to try to put it in perspective. The truth is this: when you show up and when you are bold, things happen. Nothing happens when you stay at home and sit on your hands. There will be constant reality checks, gratifying some and some terrifying. For better or worse, when you are in the action, you learn a lot. For me, in search of a way to do what I could to advance women, one avenue was clear from all of this. The Olympics were political, and the main drivers of major sports events are not the athletes, they're commercial sponsors. Actually, something very good can come of this, I thought. Yes, I know I am a ridiculous optimist many, many times, but I did think about this and said, I'm going to do this. I came home to New York. I put Newhouse School jet fuel into my typewriter and wrote a knockout business proposal to Avon Cosmetics, showing them how together we could create a global circuit of women's races that were world-class, but welcoming, glamorous, and made for TV. At the same time, we could fulfill the IOC, International Olympic Committee's, demands for inclusion in the Olympic Games, which meant we had to show active participation in the women's marathon in 24 countries and 3 continents. Avon loved it. They hired me to do it. Oh my God, I had created a career in something new called sports marketing. And in only 2 years, in 1980, we had participation from 27 countries and 5 continents and closed downtown London streets for the first time in history for a sports event with a women's-only international marathon. The glacial-paced IOC made a warp-speed decision to vote the women's marathon into the Olympic Games in 1984. ABC TV needed a commentator for this new event called the Women's Marathon. I showed up, so they hired me. And now I had a second career in sports broadcasting, a blazer, a microphone, and Al Michaels by my side. When the first woman marathoner, yay, Al. When the first woman marathoner, Joan Benoit, came into that Olympic Coliseum in 1984, it wasn't just the 90,000 people roaring approval that changed world thinking about women's capability. It was the 2.2 billion people who had seen the moment on television. That's because everyone on the planet knows that 26.2 miles or 42.2 kilometers is a very long way to run. And here were women running it fast and heroically. It was stunning. The marathon is the toughest event in the Olympic Games for men and now for women. So to me, that moment was as important as giving women the right to vote. The vote 100 years ago was our social and intellectual acceptance of equality. This was the physical acceptance. At the same time, we began proving that women excel at endurance and stamina, while men excel at speed and power. The creation of sports events utilizing women's unique capabilities will be a dynamic career path in the future. And some of you here, especially those of you from the new Falk School of Sport and Human Dynamics, are poised to create it. There's a career out there. What I'd like you to do is envision the future in your own field: engineering, biochemistry, law, and think of ways you can bring about positive change and advancement for the world good. Already in the 51 years since that Boston Marathon, women's running has created nothing less than a social revolution. 58% of all the runners in the United States and Canada are now women. And that's because running is easy, cheap, accessible, and because it's a transformational experience. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other gives people, women especially, a sense of accomplishment and confidence. It gives a woman the courage to do what she thinks she cannot: leave a bad relationship, find a better job, or get an education. But we have a long way to go internationally. Zahra Arabzadeh was born in Afghanistan and has come to the United States to study. She's a runner, and every day marvels at the privilege of being able to run outside every day. When someday Zara is able to return to Afghanistan, she will press for the time when women can run in daylight and not in groups at 4 a.m. when no one can see them. This puts a whole new spin on showing up. Think about running and what it would do for the Mideast. Think about the Mideast and other parts of the world and what you could do to help positive change in your career. I'm telling you all of this because you don't start things necessarily to change the world, but things often happen when you take responsibility for something along the way. And when you change thinking about half of the population of the world, it's significant. It's not just about women, by the way. It's about all of us. We're actually in this together. In 1967, I was the only woman in the Boston Marathon wearing a running bib. Who would have imagined that last April, 2017, as I stood on the starting line for my 50th anniversary run, 12,000 women stood there with me wearing official running bibs. Who would have imagined that both men and women would run because, like me, someone told them that they were not good enough, not welcome, or the wrong gender, race, or religion? They've become fearless. Who would have imagined that the old bib number, there it is. Who would have imagined that the old bib number that this official tried to rip off of me in 1967 would now become a global foundation called 261 Fearless that empowers women, many of whom live fearfully, to run and take control of their lives. Who could imagine the gratitude I feel knowing these women and men are going to take this legacy forward to future generations, giving them confidence, strength, and power? And even I would only have dreamed to have the health and determined gratitude to run the Boston Marathon at 70, reminding all of us that longevity, good health, and optimism are increased by an active lifestyle. Stay fit. Lastly, please imagine this as a final metaphor. Two figures, one the gray-haired mailman and a 19-year-old girl journalism student, running through the dark, interminable snow of Syracuse, just loving the run and showing up every day, and how their metaphorical run may give us yet another model for the future. When people run or work and strive and create together, the world changes for the better. In this era of renewed sexual contentiousness, of racial and gender divisiveness and terrorism, and where social media has also become social meanness and social malice, our simple activity of running shines like a beacon that can give us an example that all of us, runners or not, can use in all of our different fields in our very different lives. Here it is. A few days before last November's New York City Marathon, a terrorist killed a group of runners and bikers by driving his truck into them. Suddenly, the media were asking me, "Aren't you afraid to run the marathon next week?" And I answered this. On Sunday, I'm going to be running with 50,000 people. The man running on my left is a different race from me and from a different culture. On my right is a woman I've never met whose orientation I don't know. Neither of them speaks English. We're strangers, but we share a common language called running, and I would trust them with my life. We don't care about gender. It doesn't matter. We're motivating each other as runners, and we will hug each other at the finish, sweaty and stinky, and it has nothing to do with sex or violence. The crime rate is at its lowest on Marathon Day as 50,000 people bring joy and hope to a city. Running gives us an example of inclusiveness, diversity, respect, and peace that we need now more than ever. If it works for running, it will work for everything else. Think about it. The artist, the poet, the engineer, the nurse, the lawyer, people who strive, create, and work together respect each other. You can build it in many different versions that have nothing to do with running. You have your Syracuse University degree. You have the skills. You have been trained in excellence. You value respect. You have the opportunity, and you have a world waiting for you. Be fearless. Thank you. Thank you.